You're listening to Season 1, Episode 3 of the English Speakeasy Podcast, a podcast to help you practice your conversational English listening and speaking skills. I'm Michael. I'm an English teacher, a podcaster, and the co-founder of Lang Club, a social English community where people from all around the world gather to practice their English conversation. Visit langclub.live for more information.
Hello, everyone. This is Clara Thea, and I'm a journalist and an English teacher, and I'm currently hosting the program The British Whisper on just Spotify, and I'm really glad to be here with Michael talking. And you can find all the information about the podcast on thebritishwhisper.com.
The English Speakeasy Podcast is a podcast where you can listen to real English conversations about a weekly topic in order to improve your listening and speaking skills. This week, we're going to be talking about language contamination, the influences of other languages on English, as well as influences of other languages on third languages too. But before we do that, let's talk about our weeks. So what have you been up to since we last talked?
Yeah, well, there were a lot of exams. This is the period of tests, and so a lot of students doing, the Cambridge test. So it was quite full. Some of the students, of course, just were really worried, but then the outcome, I think, was better than they expected. So
Wonderful.
It was very nice, and supporting the students doing the exams, and trying to calm them a little bit, like just really before they do, especially the speaking. So that's why you need to listen to us and practice more as much as you can, your listening skills, because the more you are exposed to the language, the more you absorb it, even if it's a passive thing. Right, Michael?
I always say English that goes in turns into English that comes out. If you want to be a good speaker, you have to listen. If you want to be a good writer, you have to read. It's how you learn it, right? It sort of translates in your mind. What you put in, it turns into what comes out. Absolutely.
Exactly. And how was your week?
Oh, it was a bit of a crazy week. Well, as you know, I had to do a visa run this week.
Yeah,
one of the annoying aspects of expat life that we didn't talk about in the last episode. I had to go to Cambodia to apply for a new visa for Thailand. So I took a visa run for 1 week. It was okay. It was a fine trip. The problem was that it wasn't really a vacation because I had to send my passport to the Thai embassy. And that meant I couldn't really travel around. I couldn't go anywhere. I just had to stay at my hotel. I couldn't take a day trip because I couldn't buy a bus ticket or anything because I didn't have my passport with me. So I was staying in Phnom Penh and it was okay. But I've been there many times for the same reason. I've seen all of the museums. I've been to all of the attractions. It was not the most exciting trip, but anyway, I have my new visa.
That's what matters.
It's okay. I had some good food while I was there. I had some good coffee. They have very good coffee there in Cambodia, but not a very exciting vacation. But I'm glad to be back in Thailand now with my new visa.
How's the weather there? Last time we were talking about how hot it was. Is it still
very hot? Oh, it's still very hot. We're hoping maybe in a month or two, hopefully it's going to start raining. It's not as bad as it has been, but it's still very hot and it's still very humid. It's really, for me, it's the humidity that bothers me the most. It just drains my energy, It saps me.
Yeah. It's too much, when it's too humid. Absolutely. Yeah, here has been quite similarly in Italy, in the north side. We had actually quite problems with rain. So I don't know if you heard from the news that there were a lot of floods, especially in Emilia-Romagna, which is a region which is not very far from where I live. But luckily, where I'm based, the situation is better. And we have been just having these heavy rains for days. And then now, all of a sudden, it's summer. 28 degrees today. And the last week, there were like 15 or 16. So
right. Oh, my gosh.
Big jump. Yeah, so it's always like this. But anyway, now it's sunshine, and I hope that everything will turn out well for.
I hope so. Before we play the conversation, let's go over some of the vocabulary and expressions that you're going to hear us use. Language contamination. Noun. The foreign external influences from one language on another. Visa run. Noun. A short trip across a border in order to apply for a new visa. To sap energy, verb, to drain energy rapidly. Root words, noun, the foundational building blocks of a language. Beowulf, an Old English epic poem considered to be one of the earliest pieces of English writing. The Norman Conquest, the 11th century invasion and occupation of England by France. Nobility, noun, the group of people belonging to the highest social class in a country, the aristocracy. Juicy, adjective, when referring to news, interesting or scandalous, ripe for gossip. To displace, verb, to take the position or role of something, to remove and replace. Lingua franca, noun, any language that is used for communication between people who do not share a native language, a common language or bridge language. You can review these vocabulary words and phrases on our website. Click the link in the show notes to see the article that we wrote about this episode. You can also find discussion questions related to this topic.
So, talking about language.
So this will be interesting because, I know a little bit of Thai, and I can maybe mention some of the influences on Thai language. Of course, I can talk about a lot of the influences on English. I'd also like to hear about Italian as well. You can share that. But I think that to introduce this topic, I think that a lot of my students ask me, why does English have so many words that have the same meaning? Right? Why are there so many words that are synonyms for each other in English? They say English has such a big vocabulary. What's the reason for that? And truthfully, a lot of that is because English takes root words from so many different languages. We have words with German roots and, French roots and Latin roots and Greek roots, and we combine them all together and we end up with a lot of words that have the same meaning that come from different languages and have that influence from other languages on English. And that's not unique to English. I think every language nowadays is influenced by others. There's no such thing nowadays as a pure language. In fact, I would guarantee that no one that's an English native speaker, unless they're some scholar, if anyone looks at an example of Old English, for example, Beowulf or something like that, it is unintelligible. It looks like a completely different language, different alphabet, different words. You can't understand a word of it. So there's no such thing really as a pure language, I would say, nowadays. I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I totally agree, Michael. And you said a very interesting thing, just languages are changing because languages are alive. Okay. And so, yes, if we look at Old English from Beowulf or other Shakespeare's plays, that of course, what was used that time was completely different than what we use now in English. British English sometimes is different from American English as well. So the region where you speak, the place where you live, has influences on you, on the accent,
so much, yes.
On the use of certain words. The words are changing in English depending on the place you live. And also we as English speakers struggle sometimes to talk with someone maybe from Scotland or just from Wales, if they speak strictly their dialect, or if they eat. So even us as English speakers, we struggle sometimes. So it's better to say to students, don't discourage, don't be, just if you don't understand, we have the experiences as well.
Yes. Yes.
Not just when you are an expat, when you struggle with the local language, but also when you speak with your own, fellow speakers sometimes.
Absolutely.
So that's an important thing. Languages are alive. Languages are changing from the place you live to really, the time you are, so the era you are, and so. Really a beautiful thing. But every language is being contaminated by other ones. You were mentioning Italian, and Italian has a deep, of course, as you know, deep origin in Latin. Mm-hmm. And Latin was also brought by the Romans into English. We think about words very simple, who are sometimes, as Italians told me, there are some words they recognize because they are literally similar to the Latin root. Yes. And so they can identify them easily because they really are the same in English, because they were starting from the same Latin word. For example, castle derives from castrum, which is local, fortified building that was coming from Latin. Just an example, but many of these words.
It's all about history, isn't it? I mean, of course, England was conquered by the Roman Empire for hundreds of years. So, of course, it makes sense that this influence would come into the language as well. Where do these other influences come from? Well, England was conquered by France as well during the Norman conquest period. And that's where all these French roots come from. And so, it's very, if you study the history, it makes a lot of sense. It's very clear how the language developed this way. It's all about history. People ask, why are there different words for animals and food? For example, why do we say cow and beef, or chicken and poultry, or pig and pork? It's because the animal word was what people were saying in English or in the Germanic language. Who were the ones that were raising the animals? It was the local people. But who were eating the food, right? It was the nobility, the French that had colonized England, or had conquered England at the time. So they had those French words for beef and pork and poultry. So it makes a lot of sense. And you can trace that back to the history, just like you said, with the Roman Empire colonizing England and putting that Latin influence on the language.
And we can see it very clearly, as you mentioned beef, but you can see it very clearly in food. Food
Yes.
is a lot contaminated by other languages, and if you see a menu from any restaurant, they will have using some words where might be Italian or might be French.
Yeah.
It's normal when there is so much food culture around. People are used to say things in the local language. So I wouldn't use the noodles for spaghetti, of course, because they're totally different. But but it can it can be confusing sometimes. But that's true. So some words are used as they are. Because of just how they will probably embedded in the local culture, and so happen to visit an Italian restaurant, a French restaurant, a German one, even a Spanish one, you would probably find the local terms used. So this is nice, isn't it? It helps you to to get more in the experience somehow, just as a food or local culture as well. So I think it's if you think about shows, for example, opera, everyone knows which is opera, to the lyric music, and then so all this lyrical music everyone knows because it's opera, and opera is an Italian word, but everyone knows. They know it, and it's good that this is so recognizable by everyone.
Yeah. And, part of that is that English doesn't really have some regulations like some countries do. For example, in France, I believe they have the Académie Française. It's this government agency that regulates the language. And it says, this is correct, this is not correct, and they meet and they vote and they release some books about what's proper. But English doesn't really have that. And it's just like you mentioned, we have all these different dialects. We have Scottish English and American English. And even within the United States, we have Northern and Southern and Texas English and Louisiana English, all these different dialects. And there's no regulation. And so because of that, it allows all these external influences to come into the language and be considered correct. It still allows them to be correct English. And that's a great thing, I think, that like, just like you said, it allows English to be alive. It allows it to kind of grow and develop naturally wherever it takes hold. And I think that's really interesting too.
Yeah, and then talking about just rules, of course, in Italy, what was a recent news that is very juicy and interesting was that our new Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, is trying to shield the Italian language from foreign contamination. And just a couple of months ago in March, the Prime Minister has proposed imposing a fine up to 100,000 euros on public and private entities which use foreign terms, most notably English, instead of Italian in official communication. Okay, only in official communication. Yeah. So the bill was presented by lawmakers from this party, and will have to be approved, of course, by both houses of parliament to become law. Actually, there is no indication that when this might happen,
right?
But it's curious that they decided to shield language somehow. Just because there is probably an over contamination and overuse of all the acronyms, especially all the name indicating jobs in companies, for example. But not only. And of course, this is funny because everyone uses English, probably even not, being aware of it. And so, Yeah, that's curious, and I don't know if this will ever become a law. I don't think so, but yeah, but this is one just just of the reasons why probably Italy has such, just a love for the language, and they try to, avoid using foreign words, especially in official communication, if it's possible, of course, because probably the young generation have overused it a bit. Don't you have this experience? I don't know, maybe in Thailand not so much, but think about maybe Spanish and English in America.
Yeah, I would say so. I would say that overall, from an English perspective, I think it's great. The fact that English accepts all these words from other languages and sort of absorbs them like a sponge. But from the
Mm.
other side, I can see it being a negative if you're not an English speaker. I can see people feeling like their own
Yeah.
language is maybe being erased or even displaced by
Mm.
English around the world because English, of course, is kind of a lingua franca nowadays. It's sort of
Yeah,
that common
sure.
language. And I can see it, and I do think it's a shame when local languages are displaced by English, but at the same time, it's still being, it's a tool for communication, and I can see both sides of the issue. I totally can.
Mm.
I can understand people wanting to preserve their language in the face of globalization, but at the same time, I can also see the importance of having this international language that people can use to
Exactly.
communicate together.
We can all use language, like English, really to, I would say, probably destroy barriers between people. So
Yeah,
everywhere you go, if you use English, you are understood and you can communicate. And this is really important because it's not the widest spoken language in the world. We know that
yeah,
it's not.
right.
Still, is the probably the, as you said, lingua franca is the most used and easy to use for communications. And then of course when you visit a place, it's probably exciting if you know the local language, if you visit Spain, if you visit France or Germany, to use it. But of course maybe you are limited in your vocabulary, and if you speak a good English or you understand it better, you can definitely travel all around the world with no problems. And this is important, but we don't have to really probably let the other languages somehow, just die under, just under the contamination of English words. So I
Right.
understand.
Yeah.
Italy is not the only one. I think also in Greece they did a similar. There was a similar debate
Hmm.
about how words are used in the Greek language, and the Greek language, which is one of the oldest. For example, in Italy, they study Greek at
Right.
the high school. It's not. It's just an high school that has Greek and Latin as a sort of a fundamentum, being just really building of the subject they study. But it's interesting because you think that well, Greek, who's speaking Greek nowadays? Just Greek people? No. It was spoken by philosophers. It was spoken by really, just many civilizations years ago. And so, the alphabet has been used for centuries. And so, I think, yeah, some ancient and rich languages are still sort of under the influence, and then maybe they fear that they will, I don't know, die eventually. And I don't think this will happen. I think that every country will keep their own language. What do you
Right.
think?
I think so. I think so. And it's an interesting point that you made about the Greek alphabet. I mean, even the word alphabet itself is a Greek
Yeah,
word that came into English,
exactly.
right? Through alpha and beta, the first two letters, A and B of the Greek alphabet. Um, but you're absolutely right. If you want to study the classics, if you want to study the writings of Homer and the Iliad and the Odyssey and these great myths and writings and Plato and Socrates that influenced, I would say American civilization, Western civilization as a whole, sort of the foundation of Western civilization, well, they're all written in ancient Greek, aren't they? And so there's still a lot of value in studying these languages, and they definitely shouldn't disappear. And I don't think they're going to because of that. I think they still have importance. I don't think there's ever going to be a time when humanity only speaks one language.
Mhm.
There may be a common language that we all
Yeah.
speak, but I don't think there's only going to be one language in the world. I
Mm.
think that language is such an important part of culture, and people
Yeah.
have so much pride in their language. I really
Mm.
genuinely don't think that there's going to be a time when all languages disappear except for one. I think that there's going to be always be people that hold on to their language and try to
Yeah.
preserve that piece of their culture. And I think that's
Exactly.
important.
Yeah, I think it's not the language that dies, it's really, the people that speak it. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's really languages do change, of course. So, but we need to keep that in mind. It's probably also distance a bit ourselves from these war fronts, which are fictional, of course, just and focus on the essential knowledge that is a language breathes only when its speakers are able to, just use it and just communicate it again and again. So I don't think that young generations will stop using Greek or will stop using Latin or probably Italian or Spanish just because it's their language and they won't using it. And so until people are speaking it, these languages will be alive.
I think so. And I think it's just more likely that people will become more frequently bilingual instead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, bilingual. Wow, yeah, that's a great luck. Just I probably mentioned in some of my previous episodes. I
Mhm.
had the chance to live as an expat in
Right.
South Tyrol, German, and they have this bilingualism since they are
That's so
born because
cool.
they
Yeah.
start speaking German probably because the main language is that one, and then at school they study Italian, and so when they grow up they literally speak two languages, and then they acquire English, of course, because that's what is taught also at school, and so they really have a richness, and this is typical of this little side of Italy. And there is another part of Italy, which is Valle d'Aosta, and they speak French there, but yeah, it's interesting as well. They speak French and they teach French at school as well. So they are also bilingual there. And many families are French mother tongue, but they speak also very well Italian since they are kids. So, so they're really lucky to have this opportunity. And so, if you have children, dear listeners, really try to give them the opportunity to learn any languages when they are kids, because they will absorb it as sponges very quickly, and you will give them a great gift, really a great one.
I can't speak for everywhere, but I know in the United States, for a time in the past, there was this push when people would immigrate, this push to become quote unquote American, to speak English, and to forget about the past. My family, my surname is French. My family was French, and my great grandfather could speak French. He came from France to Canada, and then or his family did, and then my grandfather learned French, and he was even a French translator for the U.S. Army during the Second World War. But my father never learned it. They never taught it to my dad. And so that whole piece of our culture, our family history is gone. My dad never learned French or Canadian French, and I never did either, because back then there was this push that if you immigrated to the United States, this idea that you had to speak only English. And I think that's a shame, because now there's something lost in my family history. So I agree exactly with what you're saying, right? Teach them the language, teach your children the language, and help this culture continue through history, because kids can learn lots of languages. Kids are like sponges when it comes to language. They will absorb all of it. If you speak to them in your native language, they'll learn it, and they'll learn English at school, and they'll learn English with their classmates wherever they might be. But I really wish that piece of my family history had been preserved.
Oh, yeah, that's a bittersweet memory you have. It's very interesting. Yeah, I totally agree with you. If you have the chance to keep your own language, if you are bilingual, and let your children speak it, that would be a great thing for them. And also, just go ahead with the English, and expose yourself the most as you can to all these different languages, and you will enrich your experience for sure.
So in Italian, is there some sort of government agency that sort of oversees and regulates the language? Like I know there is one for French, but what about in
Yeah,
Italian?
it's Academia. I think it's Accademia della Crusca, which is in Florence. Sits in Florence. They also publish a dictionary, and they have these rules. And so, if you have a doubt about Italian, you go to this website, and you can also check the rules and whatever. And so, yeah, it's one of the most ancient academies in its It's in Florence. Yeah, and of course yeah, they're really worried about this contamination, and so they try to. just as much as possible, the use of Latin and Italian as well. But yeah, I think that anyway, in Italy, as overall people, they speak different languages. Not just for example, English is studied, of course, at school. There's a compulsory, just subject. But in the past, for example, I had students who were in their 50s or 60s, and they told me that they were studying French, because at the time English was not, just so, I would say, probably useful, and people were more used to teach French, so they learned French at school.
Of course, yeah.
Generations are changing, so. So, they studied French instead of English, and then their children instead studied only English. But if, of course, you can also study German and French, but you have to select a language school, of course, just like a school that has different languages. And here in Italy, which is good. And but more and more students, more and more young students also are exposed to the language when they are kids. So more and more kindergartens and elementary school, primary schools are getting mother tongue teachers to do these hours with children. And I think that the new generation will be probably more well versed at speaking the language than the current ones, probably.
Right.
That's my.
It's quite interesting. Here in Thailand, the students start learning English in kindergarten, and so for example, I was, a teacher in a high school. I taught grade 7 through grade 12. And in kindergarten and primary school, when the students learn English, they're with a Thai teacher and, maybe a native English teacher as well, like co-teachers. But by the time they get to high school, because they've had this sort of immersion environment, because they've been learning it for so long, they don't need a co-teacher anymore. By the time they get to my class in grade 7, I'm able to teach them English in English, and it's amazing. Kids, the younger they are, the easier it is to learn these languages, and the easier it is to become bilingual. Kids are just really good at language acquisition.
We should all, just like take a time machine and go back when we were kids.
I wish. It's one of my big complaints about the U.S. education system is that we don't have any emphasis on foreign languages. Even in Texas, where I grew up, where there's a lot of people that speak Spanish natively. We learned some Spanish in school, but second language was not a requirement until grade 9, I suppose. It's not a priority in the U.S., even so. And that holds us back a lot. The truth is, the U.S. doesn't even have a national language. English is not the national language of the U.S. We don't have one. Technically, it's just the common language that we speak. And yeah, I wish I had a time machine to go back and learn languages when I was younger. But truthfully, that's not a priority in the US education system. And I have a big problem with that. I think that's a big flaw in our system. Yeah. And it's something I really regret from growing up.
Yeah, so probably new generations will have this fixed, because a lot of, just the now educators and education just the authorities are more concerned, more aware of the importance of speaking a second language.
I hope
yeah, will have the opportunity. So, dear listeners, if you have the opportunity to study another language, not just English, but study it, and it's really enriching you and widening your horizons. So, go ahead and get the chance to do that.
Absolutely. And learning is never wasted. Even if you think you'll never truly use the language, you can learn it anyway. It's never a waste of time to learn something new, is it?
It's exactly like that, Michael. And yeah, so I wish all, just maybe we can ask our listeners to share some of their experience, just their language abroad, or having some, just probably influences in their native language. Maybe they're Spanish, maybe they're French, maybe they're Germans. Listeners. Yeah, tell us.
I would love to hear about that. Yeah, how did other languages influence your language? Like, for example, I know that here in Thailand is famous for being the only country in Southeast Asia that was never colonized by a European country in its history. However, there's still influence, even so. For example, the word for door in Thai is pratu. And I recently learned that that word is related to the Portuguese word porto for door. So even here in Thailand, there's influence from the Portuguese language, and that's just something I never would have thought about. It's so fascinating to find these connections and find these influences from other languages. I think Italian, it's really cool. Yeah.
porta. So it's saying, just stem from the same
Definitely,
letter.
definitely. I'm sure a Latin root, same as like in English, you could call a door a portal as well. In English, it's really
Amazing.
interesting. You would never think of Thailand having that connection, but it does.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No. Fantastic.
I would love to hear that from our listeners.
Yeah. So please do get in touch with us. Michael has all the information about that.
Yes, we have an email, englishspeakeasypodcast@gmail.com. Please, let us know, what did you think about this topic? Tell us your experiences learning language as well. We're definitely going to read the emails you send in. Maybe we can even read them and talk about them on a future episode of the show too, because I think that would be so cool to hear about.
Fantastic. So thank you for listening, and share with us your experiences, and me and Michael will be here to just speak about that with you.
Most definitely. And if you, our listeners, have a topic you would like to hear us talk about, let us know that as well. We would, this is a show for you to listen to us talking, listen to our conversation. So if you have something specific you want to hear us talk about, please write in as well. That would be amazing. We want this to be a sort of a two-way street, a two-way conversation with you, our listeners.
Thank you so much.
We're going to be back again next time with another topic. But until then, if you want to practice English conversations just like this one, you can visit langclub.live, where you can join me for some free discussion sessions hosted every single week. And what if you want to learn more about the news in English? What can you do?
Yeah, you can definitely, just go to the website, thebritishwhisperer.com, where you can find all the episodes that I registered, and you can learn more about English news and what is hot and what is happening around the world in English. So just go and tune in, and the podcast is available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, The British Whisperer.
Fantastic. And I think that is such a great way to learn English. Like you say, you're not only you're not only practicing language, but you're being connected to the world around you as well. And I think that's important. I think that's a fantastic way to practice. So folks, if you're listening, go subscribe to the British Whisperer as well. You will benefit a lot from that.
Talk to you again soon, Dan.
We will talk to you guys again in the next episode.